Her daughter laughed across the brunch table. "You can't even drive anymore." Marilyn Wade, widow and grandmother, didn't flinch. Rachel, once heir to her will, her car, her estate, sipped iced tea like nothing had changed. But by sundown, Marilyn's name was on the Porsche title, and Rachel's was gone from every document that mattered. She'd spent decades keeping the peace. Now she kept the keys. And when Rachel finally saw the car in Marilyn's driveway, all she could say was, "Wait, that's the one I—" All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Marilyn slid into the booth across from Rachel and Ava, the familiar antiseptic scent of the doctor's office still clinging to her skin. It wasn't a major appointment, just a checkup, but the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights seemed to hum in her bones. She had been steady throughout the visit, nodding at the nurse, agreeing with the doctor. But now, at brunch, she felt the weight of it all pressing in from every direction. Ava was already sipping her iced tea, tapping away at her phone. Rachel, however, seemed to have a smile that was too wide, too rehearsed, as she waved her mother in. Marilyn settled herself in, placing her purse neatly on the seat beside her and reaching for the menu. Her fingers curled slightly as she touched the edges, a faint tremor she hadn't quite noticed before. She hoped Rachel wouldn't see it. The last thing she needed was more ammunition. Rachel's gaze didn't leave her phone as she casually waved a hand across the table. "I'll have the eggs, Benedict," she said, barely looking up. Ava shot a quick look at her mom, then down to her own glass. Marilyn could see the discomfort there, the way Ava's eyes flicked between the two of them, silently gauging the tension. Marilyn had never wanted to be the source of it. But then Rachel spoke again, her voice raised, loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "You can't even drive anymore." Marilyn's fingers froze on the menu. For a moment, the words didn't fully register, and the noise around them, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversations, seemed to fall away. A cold, sharp, prickling sensation crept up her spine. Rachel laughed. Not a quiet chuckle, but a brash, clear sound that sliced through the room. Marilyn glanced up, but she couldn't meet her daughter's eyes. Instead, she saw the startled expressions of the strangers at the table nearby, their eyes wide for a moment before they quickly turned back to their conversation. Ava's face tightened, her shoulders squared as though bracing for something. She looked at Marilyn, her expression unreadable for a split second. But in that silence, Marilyn could see Ava's hurt. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Ava had never been the type to cause drama, but this was too much. Travis sat at the end of the table, his face neutral, a quiet observer as always. He cleared his throat awkwardly but didn't offer anything more. It was the same reaction she had come to expect. Nothing. No apology, no defense. Just the absence of confrontation, his quiet complicity. Marilyn took a deep breath and slowly set her menu down. She felt the mild tremor in her hand again. But this time, she wasn't ashamed. She had learned to live with it, had learned how to hide the worst of it when she needed to. She tucked the trembling hand under the table out of sight. She could manage. She always had. Rachel, oblivious to the moment of tension she had just created, pivoted as if nothing had happened. She clicked her tongue, tapping her phone on the table and looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Anyway, I've been thinking of putting a deposit down on that new white Porsche Macan. You know, the one I showed you last week?" Rachel said, her voice sugary sweet as she slid back into her role as the status queen. "It's got all the upgrades. It's perfect." Marilyn's gaze drifted briefly toward the window, her eyes narrowing slightly. It was Rachel's way, always about the next thing, the next car, the next designer label. Nothing could ever be enough for her. She could already picture the car in Rachel's driveway. The gleaming white exterior, the polished leather seats, the glint of perfection. And then, the relentless need to flaunt it, shoving it into everyone's face like it was a badge of honor. Marilyn was quiet for a long moment, letting the silence stretch just a bit too long before she looked up at Rachel. "That's nice," she said, her voice steady, almost casual. Rachel didn't seem to notice the lack of enthusiasm. Instead, she sat back, arms crossed, satisfied. "I'll be the first in the neighborhood to get one," she added, as though it were a statement of fact, a declaration of her place at the top. Ava shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze flicking between her mother and her grandmother. She seemed torn between staying quiet and trying to bridge the widening gap that had grown between them all over the years, but she said nothing. Marilyn took a slow sip from her coffee, setting the cup down with care. It didn't matter. Not really. None of this mattered in the grand scheme of things. What Rachel didn't understand, what none of them did, was that Marilyn was done being passive. She had been letting herself be the joke for too long. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she glanced back at Rachel. Maybe she hadn't lost the ability to drive after all. Maybe it was time to make them see just how much Marilyn Wade still had under control. The conversation moved on, but the seed had already been planted. The next few weeks would unfold differently than Rachel imagined. Marilyn had no intention of being anyone's punchline anymore. The house was quiet when Marilyn sat down at her desk that night. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath her seemed like distant noises in the silence. The weight of the day still pressed on her chest, a mixture of lingering embarrassment and simmering resolve. She had spent years, decades really, smoothing things over, making sure everyone else was comfortable. But now, tonight, she was making her own plans. The light from her desk lamp fell across the leather-bound planner she kept by her side, the one she used for more than just appointments. Marilyn had always been meticulous. She didn't write in it every day, but when she did, her handwriting was purposeful, clean, and decisive. Her pen hovered above the page for a moment before she wrote, in neat, deliberate letters, "Car, estate, leverage." She stared at the words for a moment, letting them settle. Each one felt like a small promise she was making to herself. Car, the one Rachel wanted. Estate, the one that had been left behind. The one that needed to be updated. Leverage, the power Marilyn had forgotten she possessed, and now she was going to use it. With a steady breath, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. The day's tension still prickled at her skin, the sting of Rachel's cruel laughter echoing in her mind. But this was different now. This wasn't just about a car. It wasn't just about the will or the house. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for years, maybe even longer. She picked up the planner again, flipping through the pages. She wrote down every little thing she'd done over the years that Rachel had never truly seen. How she had handled endless errands, child pickups, doctor appointments, school meetings. How she had been the one to hold everything together, day after day. And yet, Rachel had never noticed. Never once had Rachel considered the weight Marilyn carried. Marilyn's pen moved across the paper quickly now, the words flowing with a new kind of urgency. She didn't just write out the appointments, the school meetings, the days spent running after everyone else. She wrote down the sacrifices, the quiet hours of work behind the scenes. And then, she added, not enough. She set the pen down for a moment, her eyes scanning the page, the words on the paper feeling somehow final. As if by writing them down, she had started the first real step toward something she had never considered before. Not until today. She reached for the folder tucked into the drawer beside her desk. The leather was soft beneath her fingers as she pulled it out. Inside, there were documents, updated wills, financial records, vehicle titles. She ran her fingers over the top sheet, feeling the crispness of the paper. Each one of these things held power. The car title was just one small piece, but it was the key to something much bigger. The legacy she was leaving behind wouldn't just be money, it wouldn't just be property. It would be the power to stand on her own, to never again be reduced to a punchline. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced down at the screen. It was a text from Ava. "Sorry about today. You're not what she says." Marilyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, the words coming easily, as though she had been waiting for the right moment to say them. "I know, but she doesn't." The words stung, but it was the truth. Rachel would never understand. She would never see past her own reflection to realize just how much Marilyn had been holding together for everyone. For years, she had been the one to smooth things over, to make things work, to keep it all in balance. But Rachel wasn't interested in that kind of truth. Marilyn set the phone down, standing up from the desk. The night was still and cool outside, but she didn't go to the window. She didn't need to see the stars or the streetlights to know what was waiting. She had a plan now. With a quiet resolve, she turned back to her desk, picking up her phone again. She pulled up a list of luxury car dealerships in Scottsdale, high-end, high-ticket items, the kind of place where people who wanted to be seen went, where Rachel would have wanted to buy that Porsche. Marilyn's fingers moved quickly, tapping through the search results. She clicked on a name that stood out. Carlina Ruiz, dealership manager. She didn't need to read much further. She'd heard of Carlina before. A sharp, no-nonsense woman who didn't cater to the pretentious types. The kind of person Marilyn could work with. She paused for a moment, staring at the dealership's number on her screen. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't a joke. This was real. Marilyn was done playing the role of the quiet, understanding mother. She was done being overlooked, dismissed. She pressed the call button. As the phone began to ring, a strange calm settled over her. This was only the beginning. What came next would be entirely different than anything Rachel could have imagined. And for the first time in a long while, Marilyn felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years: hope. The sleek glass doors of the dealership slid open with a soft swish, the smell of fresh leather and polished chrome immediately enveloping Marilyn as she stepped inside. The showroom was a sanctuary of luxury. Cars glistening under soft ambient lighting, their curves and finishes gleaming with almost religious reverence. Marilyn felt a momentary flicker of dissonance, as if she had walked into a world that was not quite hers. But then, the clarity returned. It was exactly where she belonged. She wasn't here to browse, to window shop. She was here to make a statement. She walked across the smooth marble floor with purpose, her heels clicking softly in time with the thrum of a heartbeat that she could almost feel in the air. She had left the house that morning with the quiet assurance that this was the first step toward something new, something she had denied herself for too long. Carlina Ruiz was standing behind a sleek counter, reviewing paperwork when she looked up and caught sight of Marilyn. There was a quick, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise in Carlina's eyes, but it didn't last. The woman was professional, and she had seen all types of people in her years managing the showroom floor. She tilted her head slightly, her brows arching in a questioning look. "Looking for your husband?" she asked, her voice even, though the trace of curiosity lingered. Marilyn smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, I buried him," she said, her tone casual, almost offhand. It was the kind of line that stopped people in their tracks, but Carlina, to her credit, didn't flinch. She only nodded, unfazed. Marilyn's response was a small victory. She was done with that old role, the one where she smiled politely and tried to please everyone. Today, she was the one in control. Carlina studied her for a moment, her gaze flicking briefly to Marilyn's clothing, well-maintained, but understated. before returning to her face, assessing, reading. She had the eyes of someone who had learned to evaluate people quickly, to gauge their intentions in an instant. "Well then," Carlina said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Let's talk cash and title." Marilyn felt the shift in energy as Carlina led her toward the display of cars, each one more pristine than the next. But there it was, the white Porsche Macan. The exact one Rachel had mentioned at brunch, the one that would have looked perfect in her daughter's driveway. Marilyn felt a small, almost imperceptible flicker of satisfaction. It was hers now, not Rachel's. She ran her hand along the car's smooth surface, feeling the coldness of it beneath her fingertips. For a moment she closed her eyes, imagining what it would feel like to pull into her own driveway with it, to park it in her own garage. She could already picture Rachel's reaction, the disbelief, the jealousy. Carlina stepped beside her, observing her. "You have good taste," she remarked, a slight hint of approval in her voice. Marilyn met her gaze. "I know what I want." Carlina raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed, but she said nothing more. Instead, she moved around to the driver's side and opened the door, gesturing for Marilyn to get in. "I'll take you for a test drive," Carlina said. "Let's see if it's really the right fit." Marilyn slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool beneath her fingertips. She could hear the hum of the engine just beneath the surface, waiting to come to life. She adjusted the seat, her movements precise and controlled, and glanced over at Carlina, who had settled into the passenger seat. The car roared to life as Marilyn turned the key, the sound of the engine a deep, throaty growl that seemed to echo through her chest. She eased the car out of the dealership, her hands steady on the wheel. The smooth handling, the luxurious interior, it was everything she had imagined, and more. She drove carefully at first, testing the feel of the car against the road, feeling the power humming beneath her. Carlina didn't speak at first, but Marilyn could sense the quiet approval in her silence. When they reached an open stretch of road, Carlina finally spoke. "People underestimate the quiet ones," she said, her voice low, almost like a secret. Marilyn glanced at her, surprised by the statement. But then she nodded, understanding the meaning behind it. People, especially people like Rachel, always overlooked the quiet ones. They assumed silence meant weakness, but it was never weakness. Marilyn had learned that long ago. "Until they see our garage," Marilyn replied, her voice smooth and confident, the words tasting almost sweet as they left her lips. Carlina's eyes flicked to her, a flicker of amusement dancing in them. She didn't respond right away, but the silence between them was thick, charged with a new kind of energy. Marilyn pressed the accelerator just a bit harder, feeling the car surge forward, the power beneath her feet almost intoxicating. This was her moment. This was her choice. She turned the wheel, weaving the car through the open road with ease, and a strange sense of exhilaration bloomed in her chest. The car wasn't just a piece of metal and leather. It was a statement, a symbol, a key to something far bigger than herself. And it wasn't just for her. As the wind whipped through her hair, Marilyn realized she wasn't just driving for herself. She was driving to remind them all, Rachel, Ava, Travis, that she was still here, that she had the power to take what she wanted, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. The Porsche roared forward, the road stretching out before her like an open invitation. Marilyn sat in her favorite chair, the one by the large window that overlooked the street, her fingers gently drumming against the cold glass of her iced tea. The evening light outside was golden, casting long shadows across the driveway. There was a calmness in the air, a hush that felt deliberate, almost like the world was holding its breath. But inside, her thoughts churned, and she couldn't quite shake the sting from earlier that day. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. It was a message from Rachel. "Ordered the Porsche, finally!" The words hit Marilyn like a slap, a reminder of what she had witnessed earlier. Rachel's gleeful boasting about the car she thought would be hers. The smugness in her daughter's voice still echoed in her mind. The self-assuredness, the disregard for anyone but herself, her hunger to flaunt her latest acquisition like a crown on her head. Marilyn didn't respond right away. She simply stared at the screen, the words burning in her mind, and then her finger hovered over the reply button. For a brief moment she considered sending something back, a response, a rebuttal. But the thought felt like a trap. Rachel didn't deserve an answer. Not yet. Instead, she swiped her finger across the screen, dismissing the notification. She didn't even open the rest of the family thread. There was no point. Let Rachel believe what she wanted. She sat there, the cool glass of iced tea in her hand, and let the silence settle over her again. The faint buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound filling the space. Marilyn had learned to enjoy moments like this, moments when there was no noise, no pressure, and no expectations. A second notification buzzed through. This time, it was from Ava. "That's not even confirmed, Mom. You said it's a maybe." Marilyn's lips curled into a faint, dry smile. She could practically hear Ava's voice in her head, calm, level-headed, always the one trying to make sense of the chaos around them. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could reply, reassure her granddaughter, explain that everything was fine, that Rachel would never know what was coming. But instead, she chose to stay silent. Ava already knew too much. There were moments when silence spoke louder than any words could. Rachel's next text came immediately after Ava's, her tone no different from before. "Manifestation, sweetie." Marilyn's eyes narrowed at the words, the arrogance dripping from them like honey. Rachel's belief in her own ability to manifest everything she wanted was both absurd and predictable. Manifestation, in Rachel's world, wasn't about hard work or earning something. It was about putting it out into the universe and watching the world bend to her will. Marilyn set her phone down on the side table and picked up her glass of iced tea again, taking a slow sip. The coolness of it didn't bring her the comfort it once had. Instead, it felt like a dull reminder of the distance that had grown between her and her daughter. The distance that had only widened with time. She glanced back at the phone, her reflection briefly catching in the darkened screen. For a moment, she considered texting Rachel. But then, she remembered why she was doing this, why she had taken the steps she had, why she had made the decisions that had set this whole thing in motion. Marilyn's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private message from Travis. "Are you okay with all this tension?" She read the words slowly, letting the weight of them sink in. Travis, ever the passive observer, had always avoided confrontation, always avoided speaking up when Rachel's behavior crossed the line. He was the one who didn't want to rock the boat, the one who had always been willing to keep the peace, even at Marilyn's expense. "It's fine," she typed, her fingers moving quickly. "I'm fine." She hit send without hesitation. It wasn't entirely true, but there was no point in getting into it now. There was no need for Travis to understand what was happening. No need for him to understand the quiet plans she was setting in motion. As the message sent, Marilyn stood up, leaving her phone on the side table. She walked across the room to the window, looking out at the empty driveway. The night was settling in, the shadows stretching long and dark across the yard. A car drove past, its headlights momentarily illuminating the space. But Marilyn didn't move. She kept her eyes fixed on the street. The silence in the house felt like a heavy weight now, one that seemed to press against her chest. She had always been the one to keep the peace, to keep everyone comfortable. But that had changed. She reached for her phone again, not to reply to Travis, but to look at the dealership's number one last time. Carlina's name was still there, bold against the white background. Marilyn tapped the screen once more, the thought of tomorrow already beginning to settle in her mind. Tomorrow. It would all come together then. The game was just beginning, and she was ready. As she placed the phone back on the table, a small smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't going to let Rachel win this time. Not again. The morning was still too quiet. Marilyn had already prepared herself for the events of the day, but the anticipation lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant clink of ice in her glass felt muted, almost distant. It wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the moment after the first drop of rain, when everything holds its breath in suspended silence. She'd already seen the car in her mind 100 times, the gleaming white Porsche Macan, parked in her driveway, standing out against the muted colors of the neighborhood like a statement. And now, it was about to be a reality. The doorbell rang. Marilyn didn't move at first, letting the sound echo in the empty house. Then, slowly, she rose from her chair and walked across the room. She had planned everything carefully. Today was the day. She knew how she would feel in this moment, calm, controlled. But somehow, now that it was here, there was an undeniable sense of satisfaction, of purpose. She opened the door to find Carlina standing there, a briefcase in hand, a neutral smile on her face. The manager of the dealership looked every bit the part of someone who was used to high-end transactions. Her dark hair was sleek and tidy, and her sharp eyes flicked briefly to Marilyn's house behind her, then returned to her face, sizing her up. "The car's here, Miss Wade," Carlina said, her voice professional but tinged with something else, something Marilyn couldn't quite place. Maybe surprise? Respect? "Everything's in order. Clean, titled, all yours." Marilyn felt the moment stretch, the weight of the keys in Carlina's hand almost tangible, like a physical representation of her shift in power. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the key fob. It was the first time she had touched something like this, something she had claimed for herself. The smooth, flawless surface of the key felt heavier than it should have. "Thank you," Marilyn said, her voice steady, calm. She wasn't surprised, but the satisfaction of seeing it all come together wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just about the car. It was about taking control, about flipping the script on a narrative she had never chosen. Carlina stepped aside, gesturing toward the car that had just been delivered to her driveway. Marilyn stepped out, feeling the weight of each step she took. The Porsche gleamed in the sunlight, the white paint so immaculate it looked as though it had just been born. It sat there, bold and unabashed, as though daring anyone to question its place in the world. Marilyn's hand lingered for a moment on the polished surface of the hood, almost in reverence. She slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool under her touch. The smell of new car, a mix of leather, metal, and a faint trace of whatever was meant to signify luxury, was intoxicating. Marilyn felt an odd sense of peace settle over her, as though the car was the embodiment of all the choices she had made over the past few weeks. She had already claimed this moment, this victory, and there was no going back now. She turned the key, and the engine purred to life, the soft hum filling the space around her. Her fingers tightened around the wheel as she slowly pulled the car out of the driveway. Careful, measured. She glanced over at Carlina, who was watching from the sidewalk, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Marilyn maneuvered the car with precision, her eyes fixed ahead, but she couldn't ignore the sight of Rachel's house across the cul-de-sac. It loomed there, quiet and still, but Marilyn knew what would happen next. She drove the car deliberately, slowly, just enough for Rachel to see it, for the car to glint in the sunlight. The sound of the engine reverberating against the stillness of the street. She parked it at the edge of the driveway, the perfect angle for Rachel to catch a glimpse through her front window. And then, she waited. It didn't take long. Rachel emerged from the house, stepping out onto the front porch, her eyes squinting against the sunlight. Marilyn's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Her heart beat steady in her chest. Rachel's eyes flicked over to the car, and for a long moment, she just stood there, frozen. The color drained from her face, and the distance between them, between the two houses, seemed to stretch impossibly long, like a canyon that would never be bridged. "Wait," Rachel started, her voice rising barely more than a breath. "That's the exact one I—" Marilyn stepped out of the car, slowly, deliberately, with a quiet confidence that hung in the air like thick smoke. She looked directly at Rachel, not a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. "Hope you didn't put your deposit down yet," Marilyn said, her voice smooth, almost careless, as she closed the door behind her with a soft thud. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her entire posture screamed disbelief, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at Marilyn, then at the car, then back at Marilyn again. The silence between them felt like it could stretch on forever. Marilyn stood her ground, a sense of calm settling over her like a cloak. This was the moment Rachel would have to reckon with. Marilyn had given her the chance to see this coming. And now, there was no way out. For the first time, Rachel looked smaller, weak. The house was still. The only sounds the faint rustling of the leaves outside and the hum of the air conditioning. Marilyn sat in her chair by the window, the coolness of the evening pressing in around her. Her fingers lingered on the smooth surface of her phone, poised over the Facebook app. She had taken a photo earlier, the Porsche emblem gleaming under the late afternoon light, and now she was deciding what to do with it. Her thumb swiped across the screen, the photo appearing full and clear in front of her. No caption, nothing fancy. Just the simple, undeniable image of her hand resting on the cool metal. She paused for a moment, her gaze flicking to the window where Rachel's house still loomed, just across the street. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Marilyn didn't need to say anything. This image, this small, deliberate act, spoke louder than any words she could have chosen. She hit post. The screen went blank for a moment, then refreshed. The photo appeared on her timeline, the emblem bright and proud. Marilyn sat back, her expression unreadable, and let the quietness settle over her. The small thrill of victory lingered in the air, but it wasn't excitement. It was something deeper. She was calm now. The moment had arrived, and the ball was in Rachel's court. Not long after, her phone buzzed with the unmistakable sound of a new message thread lighting up. It was from Rachel. Of course it was. Rachel's text appeared in the family group chat. "Is this a joke?" Marilyn didn't respond. There was no need. The question was rhetorical, born out of the confusion and disbelief that Rachel was likely feeling. She could almost hear the frustration in her daughter's voice as she typed it. Desperate, panicked, unable to process what was happening. But Marilyn knew that Rachel didn't yet understand the gravity of this moment. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Travis this time. "Drop it, Rachel. You embarrassed her first." Marilyn didn't even need to read the full message. She could hear the resignation in Travis's words, the tone of someone who had given up fighting for peace between them. He didn't want to confront the reality of what had happened. He didn't want to deal with the mess Rachel had made. He just wanted it all to go away. Ava's name appeared on the screen next, but there was no message from her, just silence. Marilyn stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers brushing the edges of the phone. Ava had always been the quiet observer, the one who didn't get swept up in the drama. Marilyn wondered if Ava was waiting for her to say something, anything, to explain what had just happened. But she knew Ava didn't need an explanation. Ava had always understood her in a way that Rachel never had. The silence between them was always more profound than any words could convey. Marilyn set the phone down on the table beside her and stood up, walking across the room to the window once more. The light was fading now, the sun slipping beneath the horizon, casting everything in a soft golden glow. There was a stillness to the evening that mirrored the quiet resolve inside her. She grabbed her keys from the counter, the familiar weight of them in her hand grounding her. The keys felt heavy now, not because of their physical weight, but because of what they represented. She wasn't just going for a drive. She was making a statement, marking the shift that had already begun. The world would see it now. Slipping into the car, the soft leather of the seat cool against her skin, Marilyn closed the door gently, the sound of the engine coming to life almost a whisper. She eased the car out of the driveway, the hum of the engine steady and calm, her fingers lightly touching the wheel. She drove slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving the road ahead. The neighborhood looked different now, quieter somehow. The houses she had known for years seemed less familiar in the fading light. As she turned the corner, she caught sight of a few neighbors walking their dogs or sitting on their porches. They all waved as she drove past, their faces friendly and warm, though none of them knew what had just happened. None of them knew the quiet power that had shifted in the space between her and Rachel. Marilyn waved back, a soft smile playing at the edges of her lips. She was at peace. The car glided over the pavement like a promise, the world outside quiet and open. She drove for a while, not rushing, just moving. The sun had nearly set now, the horizon a blur of pink and purple hues, the sky soft and vast. Marilyn could have driven forever, the freedom stretching out before her like the road ahead. The air felt fresh and full of possibilities, but eventually she turned back. The house was waiting for her, the car waiting in the driveway. The night had settled in, but the true weight of everything was still to come. As she parked the car and stepped out, she could feel the eyes on her, Rachel's eyes, from across the street. The silence between them was no longer just physical. It was something else, something deeper. She locked the car and walked toward the door, the sound of her heels tapping against the pavement, steady, unhurried. Tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges, but for tonight, she was content. The silence stretched on, and Marilyn embraced it. Marilyn stood at the edge of her front porch, the morning air cool and crisp against her skin. The house was quiet, still, as though the world outside was holding its breath. In her hand, she held the envelope, its crisp white surface an almost exact mirror to the car parked in the driveway, gleaming and unapologetic. She had made her decision, and now it was time for Rachel to see that this was no longer a game. The letter was simple, but its weight could not be understated. She'd hand-delivered the first part to the HOA office earlier that week. Her response, official and notarized, with everything they needed to know. ADA documentation that cleared her to drive, confirming that she wasn't a liability, wasn't a person to be hidden away or dismissed. She walked down the steps slowly, carefully, the sound of her shoes on the concrete echoing in the stillness of the morning. She paused for a moment, allowing the peaceful quiet of the neighborhood to settle over her. Her hands were steady, though her pulse was a little faster than usual. This wasn't just paperwork, it was a statement, a reminder that her autonomy had never truly been questioned. Carlina from the dealership had called yesterday to confirm the final documents for the car. No more, maybe, no more deposit. It was hers, not Rachel's. Marilyn smiled to herself as she approached the mailbox. Inside the envelope was a formal response to Rachel's complaint. The HOA board had initially sided with her daughter, but now, with this letter, they would have no choice but to see it her way. She had included everything: legal documentation, including her right to drive, and a full list of the updates she had made to her estate. The Porsche was now a named asset for Ava, passed down as part of the legacy she was building, not just the car, but everything that came with it. Marilyn held the envelope in her hands for a moment longer, reading the address again, making sure everything was in order. Everything's in order, she whispered to herself, before slipping the letter into the mailbox. The decision was final. As she walked back up the driveway, her eyes flicked over to Rachel's house. She had been quiet these past few days. Marilyn had noticed the tense silence that lingered between them, the kind of silence that told its own story, and it felt different this time. Rachel hadn't come over to confront her, not even a phone call. It was almost as if she was waiting for something, waiting for this to play out. A car passed by on the street, its engine roaring through the quiet, but Marilyn didn't flinch. She simply stood there, watching the street as it seemed to stretch out before her. Later that morning, Leo came by to update her will. She had insisted on including the car as a named asset for Ava, something she could keep, something she could value without the weight of Rachel's expectations looming over it. Leo had been her estate attorney for years, a quiet confidant who understood the subtle strength behind her decisions. "I'll make the necessary adjustments," Leo had said, flipping through the pages of her will. "Everything is in order. You're more legal than half this street," he added with a chuckle, a rare moment of lightness between them. Marilyn had smiled back, but inside, the words held a deeper truth. She wasn't just legal. She was solid, unmovable. And the truth of that would become clear soon enough. After the meeting, Marilyn made a peach cobbler, something she had always done for the HOA chairperson whenever they needed something signed, whenever the community required her touch. It was a quiet, small gesture, nothing extravagant, but it spoke of the decades she had spent building her place in this neighborhood, her place in this world. She carefully wrapped the cobbler in a cloth and made her way down the block to drop it off. The chairperson, a polite but reserved man named Mr. Hartley, greeted her at the door. "Thank you for this," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to the Porsche parked outside. "It's quite the statement." Marilyn gave him a soft smile, nodding. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words," she replied. It wasn't just about the cobbler. It was about everything she had quietly orchestrated. As she turned to leave, Mr. Ikka Hartley called after her, his voice hesitant. "We'll look over your request. The HOA will meet next week. I'll make sure to get this in front of them first thing." "Thank you," Marilyn said, already walking away. She knew what was coming. And Rachel? She still didn't know what was about to hit her. She returned to her house, the weight of the envelope and the will settling comfortably behind her, the peach cobbler an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. But the wheels were turning now. She had set things in motion, and no one, not even Rachel, could stop it. Later, Rachel received a written dismissal of her complaint. The HOA's decision had been clear, their position firm. Her daughter would be told exactly where she stood, on the outside of everything that truly mattered to Marilyn. Marilyn felt a quiet satisfaction as she poured herself a cup of tea, looking out over the empty street. She knew Rachel would read the letter soon, probably by the end of the day. She would have questions. She would protest. But this was something she could never change. For now, the silence stretched on, full and rich, like the promise of something still unfolding. And Marilyn, for the first time in a long while, was at peace. The sun was high in the sky, casting dappled shadows over the table where Marilyn sat, a soft breeze carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. The Porsche was parked at the curb, gleaming in the midday light, its sleek contours almost serene against the ordinary backdrop of the neighborhood. It was the car Marilyn had longed for, but now it was a symbol of something deeper, something beyond wealth or status. It was about taking control. Ava had called earlier, asking if she could come over for a while, and Marilyn had invited her to lunch. It had been a while since the two of them had spent time alone. Ava had always been quiet, observant. She saw through the surface of things, and Marilyn appreciated that. It made their conversations more meaningful. Less noise. More truth. When Ava arrived, she looked up at the car before stepping onto the porch. Her expression didn't shift, but Marilyn could tell that she was considering it. There was a curiosity in her gaze, mixed with something else. Something unspoken, yet understood. Ava had been watching the silence between her and Rachel too, but she never pressed. She understood that Marilyn wasn't one to share her thoughts easily. "Hey, Grandma," Ava greeted, her voice soft but steady. She looked up at Marilyn with a hint of a smile. "So, this is the car?" Marilyn chuckled lightly, a genuine, unforced sound. "This is the car." Ava studied it for a moment, her eyes moving slowly over the polished exterior before she turned back to Marilyn. "I thought you were just looking at it. I didn't think you'd actually—" "Sometimes you need to take a step forward before anyone else sees it coming," Marilyn interrupted, her tone casual, but there was something deliberate in the words. "Let's go for a drive. Lunch is ready when we get back." Ava hesitated only for a moment, but Marilyn could see the shift in her granddaughter's expression. There was a silent question in her eyes, an unspoken wonder at the change she was witnessing. Marilyn didn't offer an explanation. Not yet. They both slid into the car, the leather seats cool and smooth under their fingertips. The car hummed to life, the engine's low growl vibrating through their bodies, and Marilyn could see Ava's hands tense slightly on her lap as they pulled away from the curb. They drove in comfortable silence, the city streets flowing past them as Marilyn maneuvered the car with ease, the rhythm of her driving fluid and controlled. Ava was quiet at first, her eyes fixed out the window, but Marilyn could sense her curiosity, her need for something more than just the silence. "So," Marilyn began, her voice steady, but there was a softness in it, something that hadn't been there before. "What's been on your mind lately?" Ava took a moment before responding, her gaze still outside the window, though now her voice carried a deeper note of honesty. "I don't know. It's just... things are different, Grandma. With Mom. With you. You know?" Marilyn glanced at her, her hands steady on the wheel. "I know. I've been feeling it too. It's hard sometimes, to figure out where we fit in all of this." Ava nodded, her eyes drifting back to the road ahead. "You've been more... distant. Not in a bad way, but... different." Marilyn didn't say anything for a moment, letting Ava's words settle between them. She could tell that Ava had been observing everything. Her decisions, her distance, the subtle changes that had taken place over the past few weeks. Marilyn had always been the one to keep things together, the silent force holding everything in place, but now she was starting to let go of that role. "Sometimes," Marilyn began slowly, her voice almost a whisper, "you reach a point where you realize you've been carrying everyone else's weight for so long that you forget you've been standing still." Ava shifted in her seat, her eyes glancing at Marilyn. "Is that why you bought the car? To move forward?" Marilyn smiled, a faint but knowing curve of her lips. "I didn't buy it for the reasons you think. It's not about revenge, Ava. It's about reality. It's about taking control of what I can, of making sure that in the end, I'm the one who decides what happens next." Ava didn't respond immediately, her gaze turning inward, like she was processing something deeper than the words on the surface. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "Are you still changing your will?" Marilyn glanced at her, her heart tightening just a little. The question had been coming for some time, and Marilyn wasn't surprised by it. Ava had always been sensitive to the unspoken things, the shifts in the air. "Yes," Marilyn replied, her voice firm but gentle. The car is now part of it. For you. Ava blinked, her expression softening. For me? She looked at her grandmother with wide eyes, as if the idea hadn't quite settled in her mind. You're giving it to me? Marilyn nodded, her fingers lightly tapping the wheel. It's yours. I want you to have it. Not because of what it is, but because it's a symbol. A symbol of choice, of independence, of having something of your own that no one can take away. Ava's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. Her eyes shone, the familiar flicker of uncertainty clouding them, and then she whispered, her voice breaking a little. No one's ever offered me something real before. Marilyn's heart tightened at the words, and for a brief second, she felt the weight of everything. The years spent in silence, the expectations, the sacrifices, all of it pressing down on her. But this moment, this offering, felt like something completely new. I've always offered you what I could, Marilyn said quietly, but this is different. This is real, and it's yours. They drove in silence for a while after that, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Ava didn't speak, but Marilyn could feel the quiet shift inside her. A change that wasn't just about the car. It was about the trust, the unspoken promise that had passed between them, something Ava could carry with her, something real. The road ahead was open, the possibilities endless. And for the first time in a long while, Marilyn felt something she hadn't in years, the freedom to move forward without looking back. The evening had settled in quietly, and the house seemed to hold its breath once more. The kind of silence that had lingered for days, thick and unspoken, had finally begun to shift. Marilyn was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, when she heard the soft knock at the door. She didn't need to check who it was. She knew. Travis had been avoiding the inevitable, but now he was here, standing on the other side, probably unsure of what to say or how to say it. She set the bottle down, glancing at the door before walking over. It wasn't a surprise. It was, in fact, long overdue. But she didn't move to open it immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't angry anymore, just resolute. When she opened the door, Travis was standing there, hands in his pockets, his posture slightly slumped as though he'd been preparing for this moment longer than she realized. His eyes met hers, and there was an apology in them before he even spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, not quite meeting her gaze. "For the way Rachel treated you, for the laugh. You didn't deserve that." Marilyn didn't respond right away. She stood there for a moment, looking at him, really looking. She had spent so many years tiptoeing around the dynamics of their relationship, around Rachel's behavior, around her own role in the family. But now, she saw it all clearly. Travis, for all his good intentions, had been complicit in the quiet ways he let Rachel rule the space between them. She didn't need his apology to feel validated. She had already found her own validation, but the words still hit her, just not in the way he expected. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You know, I didn't need you to protect me," she said quietly, her voice steady but sharp. "I needed you to speak up." Travis shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know. I should have said something sooner, but I—" He stopped, clearly choosing his words with care, as though he were tiptoeing through unfamiliar territory. "I didn't want to cause any more tension. You know how Rachel can be." Marilyn shook her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Being quiet doesn't mean you weren't part of it, Travis." His gaze dropped to the floor, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of regret cross his face. He nodded. Slowly, as though the weight of his silence was finally dawning on him. "Rachel's lease application was denied," he said after a pause, his voice soft but tinged with something like relief. I didn't want to tell you yet. I didn't want to add to it, but I figured you'd want to know. Marilyn blinked, a small, surprised laugh escaping her lips. She hadn't expected that. But then again, she shouldn't have been surprised. Rachel's sense of entitlement had finally collided with reality, and the result was something she'd never quite prepared for. Not my keys, Marilyn replied, her voice level. Not my problem. There was no bitterness in her words, just a quiet finality, a sense of ownership over the space she had claimed for herself. Rachel's behavior had been allowed to run its course for too long, and now, as much as the car, the house, the decisions, they were all part of her reclaiming her own narrative. Travis shifted, glancing toward the living room window. You always did more for us than anyone realized, he murmured, as if more to himself than to Marilyn. You've done a lot for Rachel. For me, too. Marilyn didn't move, didn't acknowledge the statement right away. Instead, she took another slow sip of her wine, the taste rich against her tongue. She wasn't sure how to feel about Travis's words. Yes, she had done a lot, but it was never the things that truly mattered that had been seen. No one had ever really looked beyond the surface. You've always been good at letting people get away with things, Travis, Marilyn said after a long pause, her eyes steady on him. But I'm done with that, and I won't apologize for it anymore. Her words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of all the years she had spent holding back. Travis didn't respond immediately, and Marilyn didn't expect him to. There was nothing more to say. Not really. Not yet. After a long silence, he finally spoke again, this time more resigned. You're right, he said quietly. I should have been better. But I didn't know how. Marilyn stood still for a moment, letting the words settle, then nodded slowly. You still don't know how. But that's your problem, not mine. With that, she stepped back from the door, signaling the end of their conversation. Travis didn't argue, didn't try to make it right. He simply nodded, the weight of the moment hanging in the air like a silent agreement. Marilyn watched him walk away, his shoulders slightly hunched, and for a brief moment, the house felt different. It was no longer a place of tension, of trying to keep peace at any cost. It was hers now. All of it. The door closed behind her. The silence settled again, but this time it was different. She wasn't waiting for anything to change anymore. She had already changed it all. And Rachel still had no idea what was coming next. The table was set perfectly, everything arranged just so. The china, the silverware, even the crystal glasses. Rachel had outdone herself tonight, setting the stage for what was supposed to be another family gathering. She had done it all in her usual fashion, meticulous, flawless, right down to the smallest detail. The candles were lit, casting a soft glow on the spread of food that covered the center of the table. Rachel stood at the head of the table, her hands resting on the back of the chair where Marilyn should have been sitting. She had left a plate there, an empty chair beside it. The space was supposed to be filled with her mother, but it was a silence that stretched on longer than Rachel had anticipated. She glanced at the clock for the third time. It was almost 7:30. The food had been out for nearly 20 minutes, and still, there was no sign of Marilyn. The irritation that had been simmering beneath the surface all day began to surface, creeping up her neck like a slow burn. This is ridiculous, Rachel muttered to herself, her fingers curling around the stem of her wineglass. She swirled the liquid as though it might settle her nerves, but it only made her more restless. She's doing this to punish me. From the other end of the table, Ava shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a slight tension in the way her eyes flicked back and forth between her mother and the empty chair. She didn't say anything at first, just quietly picked at her food, but the words were coming. She could tell. She's doing this to protect herself, Ava said quietly, her voice soft, but cutting through the charged silence like a knife. She doesn't want to be part of the drama anymore, Mom. Rachel stiffened, her eyes flashing up at her daughter. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in Ava's tone made her hesitate. It wasn't the usual defiance or rebellion Rachel was used to hearing from her. It was something else. Something closer to resignation. "You're not getting it," Rachel snapped, her voice rising just slightly. "She's doing this to make me look bad. She's always done this. She's always been the victim, the martyr. And now?" She stopped, shaking her head, trying to force the words out. "It's not fair." Ava put her fork down and looked directly at Rachel, her gaze steady. "Maybe it's not about fairness, Mom. Maybe it's about boundaries. Maybe she's finally setting them." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Rachel didn't know how to respond, not without sounding weak, not without giving in to the accusation in her daughter's voice. So, she pressed her lips together and turned her gaze back to the empty chair, the seat that was still untouched, the plate of food cold and uninviting. Travis, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. He wasn't looking at either of them, his eyes on the half-empty wine glass in front of him. "You know, Rachel, she didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly, almost as if he were talking to himself. "She's given you everything, more than she ever should have. You don't get to decide how someone else deals with their own hurt." Rachel's gaze flicked to him, her brow furrowing. "And you're just going to let her walk all over us, aren't you? All because of some stupid car and the way she's playing this." She stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. Travis looked at her then, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet understanding. He wasn't defending Marilyn. He wasn't even on anyone's side. He was just tired of the same old cycles. "Maybe it's time we stop trying to make everything perfect," he said, his voice low but carrying weight. "Maybe we stop pretending we can fix everything just by sitting at a dinner table, Rachel." Rachel was quiet for a long time, the silence between them thick and suffocating. Her anger was still there, still simmering beneath the surface. But there was also something else creeping in, something she couldn't name. A realization that this wasn't going to play out the way she'd imagined. Marilyn wasn't coming back tonight. She wasn't going to play the part of the dutiful mother, the one who showed up when expected, who smiled through everything, who swallowed the insults and disappointments. Marilyn was done with that. And as the minutes ticked by and no one spoke, the food grew cold, untouched. The silence stretched on, as though the absence of Marilyn at the table was a presence all its own. A heavy, undeniable thing that none of them could escape. Marilyn, meanwhile, was on her patio. The light of the evening sun had faded, and the sky was painted in shades of purple and orange. The quiet hum of the night surrounded her, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. She wasn't looking at the house. She wasn't thinking about the dinner she had skipped. She was watching the Porsche from her chair, its gleaming surface illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. It was hers, completely and entirely, and it represented more than just ownership. It represented choice, freedom, and control over the life she was finally taking back. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving the car. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was simply at peace, the kind of peace that came with knowing that some battles weren't worth fighting anymore. And as the night deepened, the door to the house across the street remained empty. Rachel never came. She never understood why Marilyn had skipped dinner, and maybe, just maybe, she never would. For now, that was fine. Marilyn had already moved on. The afternoon light streamed in through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the countertop where Marilyn sat, a glass of iced tea beside her, and the stack of documents before her. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, laid out in front of her like the pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. It wasn't the kind of thing she'd ever discussed with anyone, let alone Rachel. But now, as she flipped through the papers, there was a clarity she hadn't had before. Marilyn picked up the legal notice, her fingers brushing over the fresh print, the weight of it sinking in. It was a simple, formal document, clear and direct in its intent. The language was precise, sterile, as all legal matters were. But to Marilyn, it was more than just paperwork. It was the final step in reclaiming control over what had been hers all along. She leaned back in her chair for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she thought of the conversations she'd had with Leo. It was one thing to make a decision for herself, but quite another to protect Ava from any potential challenges. The legal notice she was preparing was not just about controlling her assets in the event of incapacity. It was about securing Ava's future without interference. The mention of Rachel in these documents was purely procedural. Marilyn had already made sure that Rachel would be excluded from anything that truly mattered. The thought made her smile, quietly, almost to herself, as she clicked through the file on her computer, backing up all her financial documents, vehicle titles, and estate details to a private folder. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was vulnerable. Rachel wouldn't understand, of course. She would never see the layers of protection Marilyn had built for herself, for Ava. But it wasn't about her understanding. It was about making sure that, when the time came, no one else could rewrite the story. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She knew who it was without having to check. Leo. She had asked him to come by today to finalize everything. He had been a trusted ally for years, but now, as he stepped inside with a briefcase and a steady but knowing look on his face, the importance of this moment felt heavier than she anticipated. "Everything's set," Leo said, glancing at the documents she had spread out on the table. "The power of attorney is clean. No access for Rachel. Ava's name is in place as a secondary health proxy. Everything's protected." Marilyn nodded, her hands folding the papers neatly. "You're sure?" Leo sat down across from her, his expression serious but reassuring. "I've reviewed everything. It's airtight. There's nothing Rachel can do. You're in full control." Ava's name on the documents had been the final touch. Marilyn had made sure that Ava would never be left in the same position she had been in, with the weight of family obligations thrust upon her, without the security she deserved. As for Rachel, the exclusion wasn't about punishment. It was simply about choice. "Good," Marilyn said quietly, then added, "You know how this has to play out." Leo nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I do." He handed her the notarized legal documents, his fingers lingering on the edges of the envelope for a brief moment before letting go. Marilyn took them, her grip steady. She didn't need to say anything more. She had made her decision, and now everything was set in motion. It was final. Later that evening, after Leo had left, Marilyn sat in the living room, her phone buzzing softly. She glanced at the screen. Rachel's name appeared, but she didn't immediately pick it up. She had no need to engage. Instead, she pressed the message to open it, her fingers poised over the keyboard. The message was brief, typical of Rachel's style. "What the hell is this? You can't just remove me from everything. You have no right." Marilyn felt a cold, quiet satisfaction settle over her. She didn't need to respond. Instead, she opened the file on her phone, confirming that the legal notification had been sent to Rachel. A generic letter, brief and direct, informing her that she had been removed from the beneficiary designations. It wasn't personal. It was just the way things were now. Her fingers moved, sending a quick text back to Ava, who had remained quiet since the legal finalization. "You okay?" Ava's message came through, Simple, but concerned. Marilyn didn't need to think long before she typed her response. I'm good. Everything's in place. No turning back now. The reply came almost immediately. You sure about this? Marilyn smiled faintly, her eyes lingering on the car parked outside, the gleam of it almost ethereal in the evening light. I've never been more sure. As the evening deepened, the weight of everything finally began to settle fully on her shoulders. The letters had been sent. The decisions had been made. Rachel's world would never be the same. And as the quiet night unfolded around her, Marilyn felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of calm, a sense of ownership over the life she had built. There was no going back now. The knock on the door came in the middle of the afternoon, a soft but insistent sound that carried through the stillness of the house. Marilyn was sitting at her kitchen table, the papers from the previous days scattered in front of her. She had spent the morning organizing everything, finalizing her plans, making sure her choices were set in stone, leaving nothing to chance. At first, she thought it was one of the neighbors, someone with a question or a comment, nothing out of the ordinary. But when she checked the doorbell camera, she saw her daughter standing there. Rachel, her face painted with a forced smile, holding a bouquet of flowers in her hands. It was the kind of gesture that felt too practiced, too rehearsed. Marilyn didn't answer immediately. She stood still, watching Rachel on the screen, taking in the way her daughter shifted from foot to foot, a nervous energy hanging around her like an unwelcome guest. She could almost hear the rehearsed words that were coming, the same ones Rachel always used when she wanted something, when she was trying to manipulate the situation. Rachel rang the bell again, her face now pinched with impatience. Marilyn took a slow breath, letting the stillness of the moment sink in. She wasn't angry, she wasn't frustrated. She was calm, distant even. This was a game Rachel didn't understand, but Marilyn was playing it differently now. She watched as Rachel adjusted her posture, trying to look confident, but there was an unmistakable vulnerability in her eyes. She could almost hear the apology Rachel was too proud to say. It wasn't about the flowers. It wasn't about any kind of meaningful gesture. It was about the car. About everything Marilyn had taken from her. Marilyn finally moved from the doorway, stepping back into the shadows of the living room, out of view from the door. She could still see Rachel's reflection on the glass, standing there waiting. And, despite everything, Marilyn didn't feel the need to speak. The doorbell rang a third time. Rachel's voice, though muffled through the door, was just loud enough for Marilyn to hear. Mom? Her tone was syrupy sweet, almost desperate. Maybe we should start fresh. I don't know what's happened between us, but... Marilyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. The words were empty, hollow in the face of what had really happened. Rachel wasn't here for reconciliation. She wasn't here to make amends or try to understand her mother. She was here because she needed something. She needed to regain control over the narrative, over the car, over whatever she could still manipulate. She could see Rachel's shoulders slump slightly, a small wave of defeat washing over her. But it didn't last long. Rachel placed the bouquet on the doorstep, the flowers resting awkwardly against the edge of the doorframe. She looked at them for a moment, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete as she disappeared down the driveway. Marilyn stood in the quiet, watching through the camera feed. There was nothing left to say, no need to engage. She had seen it all before. The empty gestures, the attempts to break her resolve. Rachel could put on whatever face she wanted, but it wouldn't change anything. A new message notification popped up on her phone. It was from Travis. She's not here for you. She's here for the car. Marilyn felt a flicker of something, maybe amusement, but she didn't reply. Instead, she deleted the message, the swipe across her screen almost cathartic. She didn't need Travis's confirmation. She already knew. As the day turned to evening, the flowers sat untouched at the door. The petals began to wilt, the colors fading, the stems curling in on themselves. By morning, they would be dry and lifeless, just like the offer Rachel had made, empty and fleeting. Marilyn stood by the window, the room silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The car gleamed in the driveway, untouched by the drama unfolding across the street. It was hers, fully and completely, and nothing, no apology, no feigned effort would change that. The house was still, the world outside moving on as if nothing had happened, and yet everything had changed. Rachel had come, but she hadn't stayed. She hadn't fought. She hadn't understood. Marilyn smiled softly, a quiet, knowing smile. The kind that came from having moved beyond everything Rachel still clung to. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Rachel, not for anyone. The doorbell wouldn't ring again for a while. The safe in the corner of the room was a silent, immovable presence, its steel surface reflecting the dim light of the evening. Marilyn stood before it, her hand resting lightly on the cold metal, her gaze fixed on the lock. For a moment she hesitated. This was the moment. The one she had been preparing for. The one she knew would come sooner or later. She didn't need to open the safe to know what was inside. She had already seen it, touched it, run her fingers over it when Leo had first handed it to her. But tonight, the car title, framed and carefully placed in a velvet-lined box, would come to symbolize something more than just ownership. It was the final piece of her plan, the culmination of everything she had worked for. Marilyn turned the dial slowly, methodically, each click echoing in the stillness of the room. The combination had become second nature over the years, the lock opening with a soft click, the heavy door swinging open. Inside, nestled among the papers, was the framed title to the Porsche. She lifted it carefully, the weight of it in her hands surprisingly heavy, as though it held more than just legal ownership. It held a history, a power that she had only now begun to truly understand. She pulled out her phone, the familiar weight of it in her pocket, and took a quick picture of the title, its bold letters shining in the frame. The contrast of the gold against the dark wood of the frame was striking. She felt a strange satisfaction as she snapped the shot, her fingers steady as she composed the image. A simple caption came to her mind, one that encapsulated everything she had done, everything that had led up to this. She typed it out quickly and pressed post. Sometimes silence steers the best. Marilyn didn't wait to see the reactions. She didn't need to. The post was out there now, and Rachel would see it eventually. Rachel would see the finality, the quiet control. There was nothing more to say. Not long after, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Ava. "That caption is so hard." Marilyn smiled softly at the words. She hadn't expected a response from Ava right away, but the fact that her granddaughter had recognized the weight of the moment brought a sense of relief. Ava had always understood things on a deeper level, and Marilyn knew that, at some point, she would understand why this was so important. The stillness of the moment felt almost sacred, as though everything that had come before, the arguments, the tension, the quiet decisions, had been leading up to this one final act. Ava was the only one who mattered now. Ava would carry this forward, this quiet strength, this independence. The title was just the beginning. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb. Marilyn glanced out the window, her gaze flicking to the street. A few of the neighbors, including Mrs. Delaney from next door, were walking toward her porch. It had been a while since they'd dropped by without reason. She wondered, not for the first time, how much they knew, how much they saw. Marilyn stood, walking toward the door as she tucked the title into a drawer, out of sight. She wasn't ready to share that just yet. As she opened the door, Mrs. Delaney smiled warmly, holding a small bouquet of fresh flowers. "We just wanted to stop by," she said, her voice kind but tinged with something unspoken. "We've been meaning to check in." Marilyn accepted the flowers with a gracious nod. "Thank you," she said softly, taking them from Mrs. Delaney's hands. "It's good to see you." The neighbors lingered for a few more minutes, chatting about nothing in particular. It was all so polite, so expected. Marilyn wasn't interested in small talk. She knew why they were here. It wasn't to check on her. They were just waiting for the next thing, waiting for Rachel's reaction. As they left, Marilyn set the flowers in a vase by the window. She took a moment to appreciate the beauty of them, the freshness of life that stood in stark contrast to everything Rachel still clung to. The house settled back into silence as the last of the neighbors walked away. Marilyn moved back to the living room, her fingers moving across the keys of her phone once more. She opened the document folder she had saved earlier, the backup of all her financial records, the vehicle titles, the will, everything carefully stored in a secure folder. Leo had ensured that everything was airtight. Ava was now the sole beneficiary, the one to inherit it all. Nothing left to chance, nothing left for Rachel to claim. The decision had been made. The evening began to darken, the shadows creeping in slowly. Marilyn glanced one last time at the empty driveway. It was time. Time for the final step. With the title secured, the flowers resting in their vase, and the documents in place, Marilyn grabbed her keys and walked toward the front door, a sense of calm surrounding her. She wasn't running away from anything. She was simply moving forward. The car hummed to life under her touch, and as she drove through the quiet streets, the soft engine purring beneath her, Marilyn allowed herself one final moment of peace. She was free now, not just of Rachel, but of everything that had held her back for so long. She didn't need to look back. The road ahead was hers to choose. As the car glided into the night, the headlights cutting through the dark, Marilyn's smile was quiet, knowing. This was her moment. And Rachel still had no idea what was coming next. The Porsche slid smoothly into the garage, its engine purring softly as Marilyn guided it to a perfect stop. The smooth hum of the car filled the space for a moment before it quieted, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Marilyn sat there for a moment, her fingers still resting on the steering wheel, the faint scent of leather and fresh paint lingering in the air. The car was parked exactly where it belonged, exactly where it would stay, until she decided otherwise. She opened the door slowly, stepping out onto the cool floor of the garage. The space felt different now, filled with a quiet, satisfied energy that she hadn't expected. For so long, the garage had been a place of storage, of things left behind, of things half done. But now it was hers. The Porsche wasn't just a possession, it was a symbol of everything she had reclaimed, a reflection of her strength. Marilyn moved to the front of the car and ran her hand gently along the sleek surface of the hood, her fingers tracing the contours, appreciating the power that now rested in her hands. It was more than just a car. It was the physical manifestation of the choices she had made, the choices no one but she had the right to make. She reached for the cloth on the workbench nearby, and without hesitation, she began to clean the car herself. She moved with a kind of quiet focus, wiping down the surface, checking every inch, every corner. She wasn't doing this out of necessity. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. It was a ritual, a moment of solitude, a moment of care, a moment to revel in the peace that came with ownership. As she worked, her eyes wandered to the door. She had left it open just enough, and from the corner of her eye, she saw Rachel walking past the driveway. Her daughter was moving quickly, her eyes straight ahead, as if she hadn't seen the car parked in its place. But Marilyn knew Rachel had seen it. She always did. It was the way Rachel's eyes had flickered toward the garage as she walked past, the briefest moment of hesitation before she kept going. There was no confrontation, no drama, just the unspoken weight of the situation between them. Rachel had already been told. She just hadn't accepted it yet. Marilyn turned her attention back to the car, her movements smooth and deliberate as she finished the final touches. She didn't need Rachel's acknowledgement. She didn't need to rub it in. The silence between them was enough. The truth was already there, hanging in the air. The Porsche was hers, and it wasn't going anywhere. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the house as Marilyn locked the garage door behind her. She stepped back outside, taking a moment to look around. The world felt still, almost suspended in time. The house, the car, the quiet of the neighborhood. It was all hers, and there was something deeply satisfying in that. As she reached the porch, she saw Ava sitting in one of the rocking chairs, a glass of lemonade in her hand, her gaze turned toward the driveway. She smiled softly when she saw Marilyn, and her eyes flickered with something akin to pride. Ava had been quiet lately, but Marilyn knew her well enough to see the subtle shifts in her. Ava had understood everything from the beginning. She had known, without needing to be told, what all of this meant. Marilyn sat down next to her. The cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh grass and the soft rustle of the trees. The air was calming, almost meditative, as they sat there in comfortable silence. After a few moments, Ava spoke, her voice light but thoughtful. "Want to take it out tomorrow?" she asked, her gaze still on the car. Marilyn smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reached her eyes. She looked out at the driveway for a long moment before answering. "Nah," she said quietly, her voice almost teasing. "I think we'll let her look at it a little longer." Ava's smile widened at the response, her eyes sparkling with understanding. There was no need for further explanation. They both knew what was happening. Marilyn had made her choices, and now the consequences were unfolding before them. The night began to settle in, the shadows growing longer as the stars started to twinkle faintly in the sky. Marilyn leaned back in her chair, the gentle hum of the evening enveloping them, peaceful and quiet. Inside, on the hallway table, the framed title to the Porsche sat prominently, as though silently waiting for its rightful owner. It was a subtle but constant reminder of the choices Marilyn had made. And Rachel? Well, she had already laughed, underestimated her mother, and mocked her age. But now she was left with nothing but the echoes of her own disbelief. Watching, waiting, and perhaps realizing just a little too late what Marilyn had already known. My daughter laughed. "You can't even drive anymore," then watched me park her dream car in my garage.